I was going to start today by discussing all of the various gun proposals that are on the table, but instead, the media have forced me to discuss their absolute malfeasance throughout this entire debacle. After the tragedy and the evil horror of what happened at Parkland, the media's first move was to jump to the suggestion that everyone who disagreed with them on gun control was, of course, nasty and mean. Now, this is nothing new. And I sort of got famous off of saying exactly this to Piers Morgan, because Piers Morgan was famous for doing this. I said to him that he was standing on the graves of the kids of Sandy Hook to push his agenda, and the media continued to do this. Tonight, of course, CNN is supposed to have a big town hall event where they have a bunch of the students from Parkland. We'll see if they have any of the students from Parkland who are not in favor of gun control. The answer is probably not. But the media have been using these students in order to push their gun control agenda. Now, I have never attempted to smear the students themselves. I have never said that the students don't have a right to speak. I've never insulted the students' pain. I've never insulted what the students went through. But because I say that you ought to have expertise on a topic if we're going to take you seriously, this is enough to get you labeled a smearer of the students. So Huffington Post led the way last night. They put up a headline that looked like this, and it's just egregious. It says, "Survivor Smearers," with a picture of me personally, and says, "Some conservatives are trying to discredit outspoken Florida shooting survivors." I have not tried to discredit any shooting survivor. I have not smeared any shooting survivor. That's absurd, it's insulting, and it's disgusting. The only thing that I have said about the shooting survivors is the same thing that I said about Jimmy Kimmel when it came to him bringing his son on the show after his son went through an open heart surgery, which is just because you went through suffering does not make you an expert on a particular topic. This has been my consistent stance on virtually every event of major consequence in the United States for my entire career, is that just because you went through something doesn't mean that you have been conferred with certain expertise. And that's what I wrote over at National Review. I had a long piece on it. I've discussed it on the show. But the idea that that is disrespect to the students, to suggest that perhaps they don't know all the details of what they're talking about, or at the very least, they have to show expertise in the topic for me to take their opinions more seriously. I'm happy to take their opinions on what pain and suffering of people who have gone through a difficult situation looks like. They are experts in having gone through a traumatic situation. So I'm happy to hear their advice on what it's like to go through a traumatic situation. In fact, I think that's deeply important stuff for people to hear. But I'm not willing to sacrifice the point of public policy on the basis of I went through something bad, because that makes for bad public policy. Good public policy is not based on empathy. Good public policy is based on reason and logic. But that, of course, is enough to get you labeled a smearer of the survivors, according to the mainstream media. And they've been doing this for days. I mean, for days and days and days, they have been doing this, promoting lies about gun control, promoting lies about people who oppose gun control. And for example, Van Jones, who I personally know, and I like Van, he's an opinion host, but he retweeted a tweet from a woman named Lori Shue, who tweeted, "Common denominators for mass shooters: white males under 30, AR-15s, Republicans." So first of all, maybe AR-15s, maybe not. There are a bunch of other weapons that have been used in these mass shootings, but there is no indicator that these mass shooters were Republicans. Even if you want to say that the Parkland shooter was a Republican because there's a picture of him wearing a MAGA hat, well, earlier this year, or late last year, we had a shooting at a congressional baseball game from a Bernie Sanders supporter. That didn't mean that Bernie Sanders was responsible for the shooting of the congressional baseball players. That's absurd. But Van Jones retweeted that anyway. And that's not the only example of the media covering themselves in glory. Chris Cuomo, earlier this morning, made a fool of himself by tweeting something out that was patently false. And Chris Cuomo tweeted out a story from an account called Cody Davis, I guess, USA Photo Dude. And the tweet said, quote, "I was able to buy an AR-15 in 5 minutes. I'm 20 and my ID is expired." Well, there's only one problem. That never happened. According to the article itself, quote, "After the sales representative walked me through the paperwork, all 5 pages of it, I told him I changed my mind and wanted to think more before I bought an AR-15. He told me it wasn't a problem and listed the store hours if I wanted to come back. I then said thank you and walked back to my car." So in other words, he didn't present an ID and no gun was offered to him. Right? He said that he wasn't going to present an ID. He left the store. That was the end of the story. It didn't matter. Chris Cuomo tweeted out the lie that he was offered an AR-15 without photo ID. Now, when he was called on this, Chris Cuomo over at CNN, the block of wood who attempts to resemble a human being over at CNN, Chris Cuomo actually tweeted out, "Isn't the point that the kid's age and lack of ID wasn't a deterrent? And this isn't all gun shops. Place I bought my shotgun basically goes farther than law requires and makes judgments about whom to sell to. Point is the system should be better." Well, why? Right? The system worked here. He didn't show ID. He didn't get a gun. I'm wondering, they ran a federal background check. If you go to a federally licensed firearms dealer in the United States, according to federal law, they must run a federal background check for criminal record as well as mental health record, by the way. The problem is that these records are not fully transparent. Sometimes the information is not conveyed down to the federal government, to the FBI. So Charles Cook over at National Review called Cuomo on this. He said the point is that the kid lied about buying a gun that he didn't, and now you're lying too. So Cuomo immediately misdirected to an unrelated topic. He said, lying, if you want to fight back against background checks, make the case. Whether it is calling the kids actors or lying about how no laws could stop the shootings, that is the BS to call out. 97% of people want better checks. Why fight that? Well, that's a complete misdirect. That has nothing to do with the fact that Chris Cuomo, a respected, objective news source, tweeted out something that is objectively false. It is just not true. Now, in a second, I'm going to talk about the stupidity of people on the right who are pushing myths about about people who actually are smearing the school shooting survivors by suggesting that one of them, particularly a guy named David Hogg, who's 17 years old, is some sort of crisis actor. They're putting out this video that shows that he was interviewed by, I guess, local CBS News in Los Angeles a few months back over some incident where he was a witness. And they're saying, well, this shows that he was a child actor because he was out in Los Angeles, and so he's acting. Well, he was at the shooting. Whether he is a child actor or not makes no difference. I have no evidence that he is. What the hell are you talking about? Is the suggestion that he's being paid for his perspective? I mean, my understanding is that from his Twitter account, he was anti-gun before this happened. Is the idea that he is being paid as an actor to pretend that he saw a shooting he did not? Because there's no evidence of that either, and that's a smear and that's a lie. That's the #1 trending video on YouTube, by the way, and it's disgusting. Anybody who's trafficking in that should immediately be discounted as a decent news source. That's stupidity. Dinesh D'Souza got himself in hot water yesterday because Dinesh tweeted something out about how there are a bunch of kids who were crying when a piece of gun legislation didn't pass in the Florida legislature, and Dinesh tweeted something out about how this is the worst these kids have suffered since their parents told them that they were scaling back their allowance or they couldn't get a summer job. That, of course, is ridiculous. There was literally a shooting in Florida last week. Dinesh got shellacked for that, as well he should have, and he ended up backing down and apologizing for it. But there's been inordinate media focus placed on that YouTube video particularly, and on the comments of folks like Dinesh. Every member of the mainstream media, that's all deserved, by the way. I mean, there should be focus on lies. But the lies extend to the mainstream media itself. And it's much more prominent in the mainstream media because virtually every major host in the mainstream media is engaging in this type of lie. Virtually all of them, or at least in selective coverage that is designed to shade your emotions in a particular direction. So as an example of this, last night, Anderson Cooper was talking about gun violence, about shootings involving guns, and here's what he had to say.
I actually think we don't focus on the reality of what an AR-15 does to a child. I mean, if anyone has been on a battlefield and you've seen what a weapon like this does to a soldier, I mean, I think if people actually saw this and saw the reality of this, I mean, it would open people's eyes. I mean, we're not talking about, we all say, oh, these children lost their lives. They didn't lose their lives. Their lives were ripped out of their bodies. Their brains were splattered on the floor. Their intestines are hanging out. I mean, it's sickening. Yeah. And we're all talking about it in this antiseptic way, and we're shocked that these kids are angry when they've been hiding in closets and their friends are dead.
Okay, that's all fine. I mean, if he wants to discuss this in graphic terms, that's fine. I'm not sure that the graphicness of the act actually changes the logic behind gun control, because the whole point here is not a lack of sympathy. See, what Cooper's trying to do, what a lot of folks in the media are trying to do, is they're trying to say, look how horrible things are. Therefore, if you don't agree with me on policy, it's because you don't think these things are horrible. That's backwards logic, and there's no reason to it. I'm going to explain more about that, and also I have an additional note for Anderson Cooper in just a second. First, I want to say thank you to our sponsors over at Dollar Shave Club. So, Anderson Cooper there, talk about the brutality and the violence and the horrible imagery of kids being shot. Yes, and all Americans agree. That's terrible. I will point out the selective coverage of the media when it comes to antiseptic coverage of killings. So I did one of the videos that I've done that's been seen the most is a video of me from this show talking in specific terms about what actually happens during an abortion, the dismemberment of bodies in the womb, in late-stage abortion, the cracking open of the skull of babies and sucking their brains into sinks. No one in the mainstream media will ever talk about that, ever, not in 1 million years. Anderson Cooper will never do a 30-second description of what an abortion actually is like. Instead, he will just use antiseptic terms to describe it. The point here being that if the media want to get graphic about how they cover crime, if the media want to get graphic about how they cover killings and violence, then that's fine with me. Get graphic about how you cover crimes and killings and violence. I have no problem with that as a general rule. I think that, in fact, that's sometimes useful if people really are unable to connect what a crime is with the nature of the crime itself. But you can't be selective about it. You can't just say that you're going to do it with regard to shooting victims, but not with stabbing victims. That you're going to do it with regard to shooting victims, but not bombing victims. Right? We didn't hear graphic descriptions of what happened to people on 9/11. Right? The news media, and this, I was actually critical of this, the news media stopped showing the video of people who were hurling themselves from the top stories of buildings because they didn't want to lead people to feel angry or feel bad. And I said, I don't like that the media is censoring that. So I don't really have a problem with Anderson Cooper talking about the effect of guns. This is what, it's true. This is what a bullet fired at high velocity does, right? It mauls the human body. It destroys the human body. It destroys anything that it's shot at. This is why the first rule, literally the first rule of gun training, is do not point the gun at anything that you are not willing to destroy. That is literally rule number one when it comes to guns. If you pick up a gun, then don't point it anywhere where it is possible that you will destroy something that you care about. And that includes human beings. This is what the NRA teaches in every one of its gun safety courses. But the point is that the media are only doing this with regard to shootings now because they're pushing a particular political agenda. And the problem here is that if you want to be an opinion host and do this, that's fine. If you want to say that you're an objective news host and do it, that's a completely different story. Brooke Baldwin doing the same routine over on CNN. She was lecturing the Trump administration, suggesting that the Trump administration was hiding somehow from the media on all of this stuff, even though that was not the case. They had a press conference yesterday, but here's Brooke Baldwin when the press conference was delayed by about 15 minutes, saying that Sarah Huckabee Sanders and the White House were hiding from the media on gun control.
Memo to the White House, you cannot avoid us. Stop trying to dodge us. This briefing needs to begin. It was supposed to begin an hour and 15 minutes ago, and then it was supposed to begin 25 minutes ago. There was a lot to talk about, and we need to see Sarah Sanders behind that podium. Jeff Zeleny and Gloria Borger are with me, and I think it is entirely fair, Jeff Zeleny, to be tough on this White House because there are so many things they need to answer for before this ceremony at the half hour.
Okay, does that sound like objective news coverage to you, or does it sound like we want you out there so we can grill you on our preferred agenda with regard to guns? And that's, of course, what the media continue to do. So one reporter was grilling Sarah Huckabee Sanders yesterday, suggesting that the president wasn't doing anything. Now, as we will talk about, the president actually is looking at doing some stuff with regard to guns. It may not be all the things the left wants him to do because maybe he doesn't think those things are going to be particularly effective in stopping mass shootings. One of the big problems with a lot of the gun control proposals that are being put on the table is that there is no clear link between the gun control proposal put on the table and the actual lessening of mass shootings. The only gun control proposal that the left has really put on the table to lessen mass shootings is confiscation of all guns, which is completely unrealistic. It's never going to happen. And then if you say it's unrealistic and it's never going to happen, they accuse you of smearing shooting survivors or some such nonsense, or not caring about the kids who died, which, again, is total crap. But here's what it looks like when the media grills the the Trump administration on gun control.
We're working hand in hand with both the federal government as well as state and local law enforcement officials on what we legally can do. Unfortunately, we can't just flip a switch, but there is a process. We are a law and order country, and the president is trying to do everything that he can under his capacity to address these concerns, and certainly when it comes to mental illness.
But the media wouldn't have any of that, and they were just grilling Sarah Huckabee Sanders. How dare you not have a one-size-fits-all solution to mass shootings? And the answer is nobody does. Right? Even Obama said that when he was in office and he was pushing particular gun control proposals like banning AR-15s, for example. He would say in his speeches, this may not stop all mass shootings. This may not stop any mass shootings. He would say that sort of stuff. And the media would just ignore that, which leads a lot of gun owners to believe, hey, well, if that's not what you're doing, then what exactly are you doing here? Now, look, the media obviously have an agenda here. They have it in how they cover these stories. They have it in the people they choose to interview. There's Katie Tur over at MSNBC interviewed a guy who said that he was going to become a school shooter, but he didn't become a school shooter because